The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Week 6 DraftKings Ownership Chalk Report. We were going to look at the fansharesports.com ownership tags and see who's going to come in the highest owned at each position and talk about a few pivot plays. Normally, this is thrown on with the injury report. They will be separated this week for circumstances which I choose not to reveal. But remember, smash the like button, and in the comment section after you've hit the like button, leave your DraftKings handle and your favorite running back pivot play to get off some ownership this week on DraftKings for Week 6. You'll be in a draw for $20 DK dollars, which I will announce the winners for on Monday's live show, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, on the DraftKings YouTube channel, where we recap the week and talk about our favorite waiver wire pickups. Do not forget, Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, though, myself and Gary and Thorne will be in studio live for an hour and a half starting at 10 a.m. You can already go and set yourself a reminder on the YouTube page. Remember to tune into that, where we'll be going over the latest injuries, our favorite plays, the updated rankings, the game reports, and then taking your questions for the last half hour. Highly recommend. It's a super fun show. So come on, support the show, support the Pat Mayo Experience, and check that out. It'll be available on iTunes the first hour at least before the viewer questions around 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday morning to get yourself all prepared for that. Joining me to break this all down from DailyRoto.com, it is Michael Leone. A lot of concentrated ownership this week, especially at running back, huh?
It's certainly looking that way with Devonta Freeman missing practice again, looking like he's going to be out. I think we're going to get some mega chalk from Tevin Coleman because it's kind of tough to make a roster this week. The pricing seems a bit tighter depending on what opens up. So someone like Tevin Coleman seems really important for cash games, and that's probably going to carry over to tournaments.
So in terms of the fansharesports.com ownership tags, what we're seeing this week, the top three, Todd Gurley, despite being $10,000, is coming in at number one at 73% start. For him, that's the lowest of the top three guys. And TJ Yeldon, 97% start. James Conner, 82% start. And when I think about it, I look at all the guys that I would project to be over 15% ownership in the DraftKings Millionaire Maker this week. I'm thinking about Gurley. I'm thinking about Gordon, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey, James Conner, TJ Yeldon. Do you think that Tevin Coleman can suck away some of that ownership?
I think those guys will still be pretty highly owned because some of those guys actually are a bit easier to use if you have cap relief from Tevin Coleman and if you see some three running back type lineups. I do feel like Coleman ends up the chalkiest. It'll be interesting to see our ownership projections with him, with Freeman being sort of with that questionable tag, only had Coleman at 9%, but I think we should see that shoot to even in the Millie Maker, I think he's over 20%. And then after that, our three highest projected owned players are Christian McCaffrey, TJ Yeldon, Melvin Gordon, followed by James Conner. And Conner's the guy that I'm having a tough time with this week. Just massive week last week, really high game total this week. I could really see people being on him again. And I think with the price increase that he's an okay play, but not an astounding play, especially with that ownership.
So that would be someone that if you were really considering ownership in major tournaments, he would be a potential fade for you?
I think so. I mean, if I'm playing Cincinnati-Pittsburgh game stacks, I'm certainly not going to exclude him. But as far as a one-off play, I like other guys better. I don't know if we want to get into the low-owned guys yet, but Ezekiel Elliott seems like a really good pivot off some of the chalkier, mid-high tier, even slightly expensive guys this week.
Well, Ezekiel Elliott, of the top 8 running backs on the board this week, is the only one projected to come in with sub 10%.
Yeah, we've got him at 7% as well. And this is one of those situations where the matchup, I think, against Jacksonville is obviously influencing what people are doing here, because we saw Ezekiel Elliott chalk at a higher price tag a couple of weeks ago in a good matchup against Detroit. And we've certainly dinged his projection for that matchup. But the DraftKings pricing is dynamic, and a 7,000 price tag for Ezekiel Elliott's really low, even accounting for matchup. The volume for him, we've got him with the second most projected carries on the week. And the big thing is he's been involved in the passing game. I think he's around 20% market share targets this year. So I think that's a really good tournament play this week. The floor is scary because you just might not see much scoring from Dallas in general against Jacksonville, but the upside is still there, just given the volume that Zeke is going to see.
So when we think about Tevin Coleman and how he could be affected by the DNP by Devonta Freeman if he ends up sitting, and again, this is something that unless they declare him out, we're not going to know until 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Do you think that will keep people off of Tevin Coleman, or do you think that people will just assume Freeman is out and a lot of that TJ Yeldon ownership, the potential David Johnson ownership of all the guys in that range just filters towards Coleman?
I think that's exactly it, the latter that you said. I think a lot of the Yeldon and especially the David Johnson ownership is going to go to Tevin Coleman. Because I think people, with a guy missing practice 3 straight days, I think people will feel safe making that assumption that he's going to be out and then pivot if it turns out not to be the case. So David Johnson is in that Ezekiel Elliott mold where the volume looks great. We know he's a talented player, but man, his team stinks. They just don't run that many plays, and it doesn't look promising against Minnesota, big underdogs in this matchup. But yet, you know what? I'm playing some of these volume guys in tough matchups because the price, again, accounts for the risk in the matchup. So I like DJ in tournaments, but there is a lot more opportunity cost than if Coleman wasn't an option because I think DJ might have been somewhat low owned anyways. So that one I don't like quite as much as the Zeke GPP play.
So what do we do with Tevin Coleman then? Because of the price, is he just a guy that you smash into your lineups whenever you can? Because as we've seen since in the games that Freeman was out, that Ito Smith got a lot of involvement. He was even getting a lot of the goal line carries that even though the price is down and he's a great salary cap relief in a week where it's tough to find some, is he even good play?
I think Tevin Coleman is going to be a really good play. It's the highest team total on the week. You're home versus an atrocious Tampa Bay defense. They're dead last in Football Outsiders DVOA by a significant margin. And I know he hasn't seen like the high-end performances with Freeman out. As you alluded to, we've seen more Ito Smith than we would have liked to see. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a talented player in just the best context possible. And really what drives it a lot for me is the tight pricing on the week in general. If it was a different week, I might be off him a decent bit. Just thinking that either, there's different routes to getting the cap relief. There's different routes to him failing. But the way this week is set up, I think even if he gives you one of those performances, like it's not going to hurt your GPP lineup. And it's just going to let you do so many things elsewhere. And then obviously there's a chance for him to be the best value on the slate. So I think it's chalk that you eat and, just hope it doesn't get too crazy. Just hope there's just a little bit there with, again, like I think people are going to assume Freeman out, but maybe it just holds back that Tevin Coleman ownership, like just enough that he doesn't become mega chalk. So if he's at 20-25% own, I'm absolutely fine playing him. When you start to get like 35 plus own, that's when you get scared on guys, but I don't think he gets that high.
So what if I decide, I don't really love Tevin Coleman. I do worry about Ito Smith. Ito Smith is only $3,100 this week, by the way. I wouldn't just discount not throwing him into a lineup or two if he's the one who ends up with the goal line work and stealing touchdowns away from Tevin Coleman. It kills Tevin's upside. And plus, at $3,100, he doesn't need to do all that much in order to return value if Devonta Freeman sits. And the last time, like in the Saints game, he only played 15% of the snaps. But against the Bengals in that other big week, Ito Smith played 43% of the snaps, and at $3,100, I don't hate that so much, especially like you talked about in a tight pricing week. I'm not saying go all in on Ito Smith, but if you played 10 lineups and used him in 2, those are ones you can sneak Todd Gurley into. That sort of thing, if you wanted to get that proper cap relief. But instead of Tevin Coleman, I'm not really feeling him all that much, even though it's a ideal situation. I still like the passing game more for the Atlanta Falcons here, and just some of the other guys in his range. Like you mentioned David Johnson. What about Dalvin Cook? He's off the injury report. He's practicing in full. You mentioned that Arizona's big underdogs in this game. I think this game's going to be a little bit closer, but if we just switch to the other side, 10-point favorites Dalvin Cook, if he's going to get the usage that he saw earlier in the season when he was healthy, he just seems like a fantastic play who's going to be like 1% owned.
Yeah, the ownership we have on him right now is 4%. And what playing Arizona does, it puts you in the positive game script most of the time. I mean, weird things happen. We saw the game against Buffalo for Minnesota, where things didn't go as expected, and I got crushed using a ton of Latavius Murray that week. But in general, positive game script, and they just inflate the plays for the opposition because their offense can't stand on the field. So even though this passing attack this offensive attack for Minnesota is so pass heavy, you get a lot of carries. So I can get on board with that. It's not a play that I, hit really hard, but I could see that in the 5 to 10% range. I'm still just a little shaky on his health overall. I do think there's some guys sub 5K, like one guy that keeps popping for us and it just keeps not working out. But as like a fringe values, Dion Lewis, who's just going to be like 1% owned, bad matchup, but the snap share has been much more tilted in his favor the last 2 weeks than it was in weeks 2 and 3 relative to Derrick Henry. And if they have a tough time against Baltimore, it's probably going to be him in the game in a negative game script since Derrick Henry's a pure rusher, and obviously Dion Lewis lets you an outlet in the pass game. Again, kind of like with Dalvin Cook, that's more like a 5% to 10% type play if you're making 10 lineups, maybe just in one lineup if you want to be pretty contrarian.
Well, as we speak right now, I've been looking at the old Twitter machine. Devonta Freeman has actually been officially ruled out for Sunday.
Oh.
So we're going to have that. We have that information right now. So expect the Tevin Coleman chalk to go way up. I think it's just going to be a fade for me, to be perfectly honest with you. If that's the thing that kills me this week, that's the thing that kills me this week. I'm not winning $1 million all the other weeks anyway. So how much could this really detrimentally affect how I'm doing? From down the list, like below $5,000, the only guy that seems somewhat chalky is Chris Carson in the London game up against the Raiders. But if Isaiah Crowell, who is a game time decision, DNP on Friday, doesn't go, do you just assume that Bilal Powell becomes the much better play there?
Yeah, much better play. And Carson's the type of guy that, going into the week, I was like, oh, I like this as a GPP play. And then I saw the projected ownership, and we have him in the double digits. And I just have a tough time getting on board with that, with how inefficient the Seattle run game has been with, they do weird things with snaps here and there with the running back. So I think that's more of a fade for me, but I could definitely get on Powell. And if Crowell's a late scratch, I do think that Powell could go under the radar where, Coleman now, especially, he's not going to go under the radar. He's going to be really chalky. People aren't going to feel as much of a need to find cap relief because Coleman provides that. So I do like the Bilal Powell play a lot more than the Chris Carson play.
The only other one is people still seem really iffy on the Bucs backfield, despite it being an excellent matchup. You have Ronald Jones, you have Peyton Barber, and you have Jaquiz Rogers. I would go with Ronald Jones if it was me. It just seems like they're trying to work him in. That could turn out to be just completely awful, but it is salary cap relief in an upside matchup. Do you have a take on that backfield?
I think if you're playing 10 lineups, you completely avoid it. I'll play, I'll MME. So depending which contest, somewhere between 75 and 150 lineups. And with this game being so much firepower offensively, you look at the game total in the high 50s, I will probably play like one game stack where I'm stacking the Atlanta side of things and I have Ronald Jones coming back on the Tampa Bay side of things. I would not take any chances on Peyton Barber. I think there's a chance that Jones just becomes the guy, just looking at what happened last week and, draft capital and everything. But that's like a 1 to 3% type play. Like that's a very low play. I don't mind it as part of game stacks. I don't think I would use it at all outside of an Atlanta Tampa Bay game stack.
But of that sub $4,000 range, Ronald Jones and Ito Smith look like the two options that you could potentially use, unless I guess you think Seattle gets way up and Rocket Richard ends up becoming a play again.
Yeah, I just don't see too much. Just checking like our daily roto values, it's just sub 4K. It's just like, Richard's actually, as of right now, because we don't have updated for Freeman out yet, he's actually the guy that pops the most, but I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. I think the volume is so certain for so many of the running back good values up top that this is a position that generally I whittle down my list. I don't expand it. Wide receiver, I'm the opposite. So I probably wouldn't fool around with Richard much. Again, if you're making a game stack, like I see it a little bit, but as a pure one-off, no, I'm not going to have him.
Wide receivers, the top 3 tag from fansharesports.com, all coming in with a 100% start rate. No one's saying sit these guys. It's Julio Jones in at number 1. Mohamed Sanu comes in at number 2, and then it's Tyler Boyd. And just for fun, number 4 is actually AJ Green. So it seems to be that's where all the ownership is concentrating. I like Tyler Boyd because he is the cheapest of all sort of these options beside Mohamed Sanu when it comes down to this. But can you wrap your mind around this wide receiver ownership? Because it's going to be hard to pay up for running backs and then pay up for all these receivers at the same time too.
Yeah, so the problem I've had with receiver the last few weeks is I feel like the ownership has been in line with the guys that we've really liked. And it's been hard then to figure out, well, do I just play less of a guy that I legitimately like to be on the leverage side of things? Or, like it's easier when it happens more naturally. Like Zeke at running back at Daily Roto, we just like him this week and he's low owned. So it's pretty easy, whereas the conversation on Julio Jones, great price, great matchup, great projection. But anytime you get an expensive receiver that's very chalky, you just start to have doubts because the receiver projections are a bit more fragile. And not only that you don't want to use Julio Jones, but the more Julio Jones you use, and as you mentioned, it's tough to get inexpensive receivers to begin with, the less that you're going to use some of the other receivers that have a lot of good volume that are just a little bit back in value. So, for example, Odell Beckham, key piece last week, came in very low owned. 2 weeks before that, I believe it was DeAndre Hopkins on a week when Michael Thomas and Julio Jones were chalky, and they didn't do that much, and people just had that ownership there. So the thing I've been doing lately, honestly, with the top receivers is considering them all pretty equal in terms of projection, just kind of like manually forcing that. So I get like a pretty natural spread, which means of a lot of Julio. Mike Evans we have is really chalky this week too. Second highest ownership projection. I'll have a lot of those guys in the Atlanta Tampa Bay game stacks, but as one-offs, I might start to look at more like, like Stephon Diggs, Juju Smith-Schuster, this next tier guys that's just not going to carry much ownership.
Well, what do you make of the Rams players in general? Because this is setting up more for Gurley, despite the fact that he's $10,000. Bad weather in that game. Kupp and Cooks both dealing with concussions. Could this be a time to get in on like a Rams passing stack, knowing that no one is going that direction?
I stack the Rams every week as part of my stacks. I usually have about between 6 to 8 stacks, QB stacks that I use. And the Rams every week, they're the number one offense in DVOA. But aside from highly efficient, high scoring team, they're extremely concentrated. You've got so many targets, and the wide receiver snaps are just absolutely dominated by the 3 guys there in Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Brandon Cooks. Obviously, we have some injury dependent news here with Kupp and Cooks dealing with concussions. The news that I've seen has been pretty positive throughout the week, so I'm planning on them playing. And we've got all 3 of them in like our top 10 to 15 values. And the way I look at it is that's with like a mean projection, right? And you've got like partial touchdowns in a projection, and that can't actually happen. So the way I look at it is, of these 3 guys, like one of the 3 is probably going to come in a bit lower than our projection, but one of the 3 is going to come in higher. So I'm tempted to do something where each of my lineups, I use 1 Rams receiver, but just only 1. And then in the game stacks, I'll use 2 of the receivers or Gurley just because they're so concentrated. But I really like the Rams receivers. They're not going to be low owned, but they're not going to be chalk. They're kind of like in that 10%-ish range. And I think they make a lot of sense.
So from what I'm seeing right now, the guys in like above 20%, like Thielen, Evans, Julio, potentially Boyd, AJ Green, they're all coming in super highly owned. People are going to have Antonio Brown probably up around 13, 14, 15, 16% as well. So I think it does make some sense that if you want to be contrarian and to save a little bit of money, like DeAndre Hopkins, although he's going to be matched up with Tre'Davious White, seems like an opportunity to exploit a lot of volume. You mentioned Stephen Diggs. I don't love that one as much. I think I'd rather go down to like Keenan Allen in that spot, who's just been good all year, and now he's down to $7,500. And Will Fuller is also the big one. He's dealing with the hamstring injury. He looked like a decoy last week, but if another week passes and he's back to being full health Will Fuller, no one's using him because everyone thinks that he's really banged up. Everyone's all in on Kiki now. That Fuller might be like the contrarian pivot play of all these top end receivers.
Yeah, the tough part with Diggs is he's got the bad, wide receiver cornerback matchup, and everyone's talking about Thielen's targets, but Diggs's targets are phenomenal. So I like that more. I'm not as on Will Fuller. don't like dealing with a speed guy with an injury. And I think that tag for him is a little high. It's tough because you rely on big plays from him, but he keeps making them when he's healthy. But I'd still rather be on the fade side of that one. I'm with you on Keenan Allen. And the other side of that game, Jarvis Landry, really high up there in air yards. The Chargers have really struggled against the wide receiver position. It's possible that's noise. We don't have a huge sample. They were much better last year, but that's something to note. I just think the volume for Jarvis Landry is so good, and the type of volume he's getting, much further downfield than when he was with Miami, gives him a bit more upside. I like that play a lot. And I mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster. I think everyone's back on Antonio Brown after last week. Brown had the big game, just kind of natural regression. I think Juju's still at a good price for this Pittsburgh team, another team with a high total that's been pretty pass happy early on, runs a lot of plays. We've got them projected for quite a bit of plays this week. So I guess if I had to pick my two favorites, though, I'll go Juju and Jarvis Landry as I think guys that'll come in the single digits.
Other than that, like the below $5,000 range, the only sort of half chalky guy at 4,800 is Mohamed Sanu. That's really it.
Yeah, I'm looking at our ownership projections now, and we really we have the same thing. Sub 5K, Sanu is the highest projected owned guy. Then after that, yeah, it's a pretty big drop off. We've got, I think, Chris Godwin in that same game as the next highest projected owned guy at sub 5K, but it's a really steep drop off from Sanu to the point where I don't think you're really too worried about not using him just because you think he's going to be chalky, because it's still not chalk at 5% projected ownership.
So do you have any favorites from down in this range? With T.Y. Hilton out with the hamstring problem, I actually prefer Chester Rogers, at least from a floor perspective. Like, I think that you could run him out there in cash games and solidify yourself, like, probably a floor of like 5-6 catches. It's probably not going to be for a ton of yards, but there is upside to go along with that with the amount of times in a game that Andrew Luck is dropping back to pass, especially with Marlon Mack now back. He might be on the field for a bit, taking away some of the catching upside from Nyheim Hines. At Chester Rogers, to me, at least seems like the very logical guy to absorb a lot of that. We saw it towards the end of the Texans game after Hilton was out. We saw it on the Thursday night game against the Patriots that Chester Rogers was the most targeted receiver that they had. That I don't mind him, but other than that, from down here, if we need the savings, where are we going at receiver for upside?
Yeah, I think Godwin in that Tampa Bay Atlanta game, just because it's such a big shootout, is completely fine. And we've seen at times this year when game stacks go off, it's the peripheral receivers that have really broken the slates. So I like Godwin. You like Will Fuller. I kind of like Kiki Kuti to keep performing well. If Fuller's a little bit not fully healthy, if Tre'Davious White's on DeAndre Hopkins, maybe you see out of the slot, those shorter routes, Kuti perform well. I believe Davis Maddock tweeted something about how his average yards of separation leads the NFL. So I'm really interested in that play. So those are sort of the two main guys. I don't mind going back to Tyrod Taylor for the tight ends. He didn't play as much last week. I'm not sure if some of that was related to a first half fumble that he lost because he had 5 first half targets and 0 in the second half. But I think the volume there for him should be okay. And I like his distribution of targets. You get some chances at big plays, kind of the high risk, high reward plays, but then you also mix in some of the screen pass type plays that give you somewhat of a floor. So those are the three that I'm really looking at as far as cheaper options.
I guess the last one would be you like Jarvis Landry, but without Rashard Higgins around, I think that Antonio Callaway does possess some value because of the price.
100%. I'll throw him in that group too. The big play upside for Callaway, combined with like I don't like taking guys that I think are like you're hoping for like 2 for 80 and a touchdown, just because I think in the way tournaments are in DFS in today's day and age, you need more volume than that. But guys like Tyrod Taylor, Antonio Callaway, I think they combine that big play upside with just enough volume overall to get more of like a 5-100-1 type game versus just like the one big play.
I guess the last guy, just because of injuries, and this could potentially open up, like Crowder's hurt, Paul Richardson's hurt. They both still might play, but if they don't, and we saw this with Doxson last week, the Maurice Harris stepped into that starting role on the Redskins. Obviously, it didn't pan out against the Saints, but if it does, like, he's the bare min and does provide salary cap relief with some upside too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's okay, just depending on how the injuries shake out. Right now, we've got those guys projected in, so I don't have where we would have them projected if they're out. I think that'd probably be like a fine periphery play. And I'll probably dig somewhat deep at wide receiver. Like I said, running back, I'm going to be a bit tighter. I'm going to fool around a lot less with the cheap plays just because the way the volume works with the running back position, receiver position, exact opposite, especially on a week that's pretty tight pricing. I'll probably have a handful of guys that I own around 10% that are pretty cheap. And as we mentioned, the field's not on the cheap guys. It's very spread out ownership there. So naturally, I'll probably be overweight on all of those guys, even if I only own them in a 10 to 15% clip.
Quarterbacks, Jameis Winston is the most tagged pivot from fansharesports.com. He is followed by Matt Ryan and then Andy Dalton. So what do we do at quarterback for tournaments? I'm only going to play like 9 or 10 lineups this week, and I have a feeling I might just fade all 3 of these guys. And not necessarily because of the ownership, because only 2 of them really rate out to be above 10% for me. That's Jameis and Matt Ryan. Everyone else is still going to be somewhat concentrated. But I think if I'm going to go cheap, I'll probably end up just going Russell Wilson over Jameis just to box out some of the field that way, and hopefully he can finally come through for me. But other than that, I might just do what I do every week. Play Deshaun Watson, play Cam Newton, and hope they have one of those game-breaking type weeks and break the slate.
Yeah, so we agree with you. The top 3 highest projected ownership guys, Ryan, Winston, and Dalton. If I were to fade one of those 3, it'd be Dalton for me. I think he's the fringiest of those plays. We just have such gaudy projections on this Tampa Bay Atlanta game, and I think the game stack upside is so big that I'm not going to fade or be underweight on either of them. I'll probably actually end up overweight the field, even though they're chalky. But it's not that too hard to do to grab them at 15 to 20% of your exposure because the ownerships get spread out at quarterback so much. So I'm not too worried about using them at chalk levels. The guy that I like a lot, but we don't really have him low owned. We have him right behind Dalton in projected ownerships. Jared Goff just feeding into, again, that Rams stackability. As far as like real low owned guys at the position, I don't think I have, too much. I'm mostly quarterback. I care a lot more just about the stackability of the quarterback more so than I do the ownership, with the exception of sometimes when you get those guys like Watson, Newton with rushing upside that you don't have to stack. And sometimes just the fact that they're difficult to stack does keep their ownership relatively down.
At tight end, the top 3 per fansharesports.com. Cameron Brate, the overwhelming number 1, coming in at number 1. David Njoku, number 2. Austin Hooper, number 3. OJ Howard has been practicing on a limited basis. As of this recording, we don't know whether he's in or whether he's out. But do you think that OJ Howard practicing, if we don't know by, before the actual inactives come out, or what's going on with him, that it could kill Brate's ownership a little bit? And frankly, is a chalk Cameron Brate really someone you want to play?
So in the Millionaire Maker, I could see late breaking news on Howard hurting the Brate ownership just because a lot of people are using optimizers and making multiple lineups, and they probably want their team set before that. If you're in single entry 3 max tournaments where people are hand making lineups largely, Brate's still going to be super chalky if Howard's out, even if the news breaks late. Do you want to play a chalk Brate? Man, this game is really hurting me, because I think the chalk's in the right spot. It should be on this game, so I'm having a difficult idea of how to approach it, and I'm just kind of at the point where I might game stack it a bunch, but then outside of the game stacks, try to be underweight on my exposure. Like if you excluded my Atlanta Tampa Bay game stacks, let's say I had like 50 lineups, not of those, I'd probably try to be underweight on almost all the players of like Julio Jones, Brate, like the main 2 chalk guys, Mike Evans as a third. I try to be underweight on those guys, but if the pricing's tough this week, and that's part of the reason why Brate makes a lot of sense. He's so cheap. So I don't think you have to full fade. If you're making 10 lineups, I don't think there's harm in playing a chalk guy in 1 or 2 of those lineups. I know some people might disagree and say, well, if you're going to go underweight, just don't play him at all. But I think that you can still play a chalk guy, be underweight, and it still can make sense. You just want to be cognizant that your overall lineup doesn't get too chalky. That's why like on Daily Roto, you can optimize and put a constraint on our public projected ownership. So you could say, I want to make the best lineup without the cumulative ownership of the lineup being more than 110% projected or something like that.
Well, Ebron still right now in my projections is going to come in over 10%. I don't know if that's going to be true or not. He's been dealing with a myriad of injuries all week. It is looking like he's going to play. Jack Doyle is going to sit. He's super expensive in a week where paying down at tight end is going to be a definitive strategy where people save money. That I just don't know how high of ownership he ends up coming in with. And if that's the case, he's probably the best play on the slate, isn't he? Like just taking price out of it.
The amount of red zone opportunities and overall targets he's received the last 3 weeks is pretty mind-boggling for a tight end. So if he's low owned, he's the best play on the slate. And I do think there's a chance, like we have him projected as the third highest owned at 14% with the injuries and stuff. And again, I can see people just going really cheap at tight end because it's tough to make lineups. I could see him being low owned. You're going to have to obviously then make use of probably some of those cheaper wide receivers that we talked about in your GPP lineup if you're going to go more expensive at tight end. We also have Austin Hooper, the other side of Cameron Brate in that Tampa Bay Atlanta game, being pretty chalky. And I think, honestly, if Howard's out, I'd fade Hooper before I faded Brate just because Hooper's market share targets last week with standings generally pretty low. He's a guy that makes his way because he's pretty efficient, decent touchdown upside, but the floor on all tight ends is low, but I think on him it's pretty low for someone that could be chalky.
Are there any low-owned pivots that you don't mind here, even if you are saving money? I think Vance McDonald's really interesting, coming off a week where he was super chalk, busted. Now no one wants to play him in a game where people are targeting that game. They're just not targeting Vance McDonald whatsoever. I think that could make sense. I also like Jeff Swaim a little bit, and potentially even Niles Paul against Dallas. I think that's a very easy completion for Blake Bortles there with Austin Seferian-Jenkins on IR.
Yeah, so I'm with you on Vance McDonald. The guy I play every single week, I'm probably going to keep playing is David Njoku. So I'll keep firing him. And I think that's I'm mostly in line with you. Like Niles Paul, I think is fine. Jeff Hireman for Denver, I think is just like a pure punt's okay as well. I don't mind getting deep into the tight end pool because the sub 3K guys are going to be important this week. Even if you're just making 10 lineups, you're probably going to run into some lineups where you just need a really, really cheap tight end to make things work.
Any interest in Greg Olsen, who looks like he's going to be returning? 4,300 seems a bit pricey for him. No need.
Right now I don't have any plans to use Olsen. I'll look at it a little closer throughout the weekend, but right now I don't have much interest.
All right, finally, let's close this out with defenses and the special teams from fansharesports.com. We have the Bears coming in at number 1, the Texans at number 2, and the Cowboys at number 3. I do think that objectively Chicago is the best defensive play on the slate, but I could see myself getting away from him. I was talked about this with Chris Raybon on the complete DraftKings pick show earlier in the week, but I really like Arizona's defense at $2,000, and that can really be a nice bridge to allowing you to pay up at multiple positions. And I think they're in a good spot here. Even as 10-point underdogs, I think this is closer. I think it's a bad offensive line in Minnesota, and they can attack Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, well, he might put up points, not afraid of stupid turnovers.
I'm with you. I'll use them in tournaments at 2K. I mean, hey, who was the highest scoring defense on the slate when the Vikings played the Bills? It was the Bills, and because of that weak Minnesota offensive line, they were able to disrupt things. And I don't think you're going to see anything like that game. But even in a positive game script, this is a pass-happy Minnesota team, and when teams drop back to pass, that's when you get the events that are going to make your day as far as tournament upside. You get the sack opportunities, you get interceptions, and interception opportunities result in higher defensive touchdown opportunities with something that's kind of random. So I like that play as well, just because I think people overreact to the points allowed aspect of defenses, which correct me if I'm wrong, I think somewhere between 14 and 34 points, the shift is like plus 1 point to -1. So if you're in that normal range, it almost has no impact on what's going to happen. So you're really looking at teams that can play teams that are going to pass a lot and create the high upside opportunities. In general, I like going cheap at D this week. I don't think the top defenses project so highly enough that you feel the need to get up there. And I'm always spread out at defense, but this week in particular, I'll be really spread out. I'd be shocked if I owned any defense more than 10% in my lineups.
Well, the only one that projects for me over 10% is going to be the Bears defense. And I mean, frankly, it's pretty flat pricing all across, or flat ownership across the board. Dallas, I can get behind. The only other one down there that's super cheap that I can see myself turning to is probably the Colts. Great pass rush against a bad offensive line. Darnold at quarterback's already thrown a few pick sixes this year. He's not afraid of a big mistake that I think the Colts, no one will own. But if they're healthier on defense, which they do appear to be, this could be a spot for them, especially if they can get a 7-0 lead or a 10-0 lead and really force the Jets into passing situations a lot.
I think the Bills are fine. I think we have a bet, and I don't remember if I won it or if I lost it. I know the Bills did well, but I think your defense did well too.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look that up. I think it may have actually been a tie, 12-12.
Hey, so we were both right, but the Bills is a cheap defense. Again, I mean, Houston has a bad offensive line. You know, if you look at the Pro Football Focus, like pass blocking advantage chart that they have, Houston's at one of the biggest disadvantages in pass blocking this week. And I could see, I mean, you're talking $2,300. It's not much. I think that's fine. And again, I don't care as much about the points scored. You give me a few sacks and some opportunities at turnovers, I'm happy, especially at that price.
All right, Mike Leone, dailyroto.com. If you use the promo code THEPME, get yourself 10% off at Daily Roto. NBA is coming soon. We'll have a full NBA preview show dropping probably Sunday afternoon to get you prepared for all the strategy that you need for DraftKings NBA this season. Mike, what else you guys got going on at dailyroto.com?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is the launch of our NBA package. As you mentioned, if you use promo code THEPME, you're going to get 10% off. We've got an optimizer. If you use our NFL package, it's really, really easy to use if you're just making a cash game lineup or a few tournament lineups. But it also has a lot of customizable features if you want to get more in depth and if you want to build out a bunch of lineups. And I know Drew and I are most proud of our NBA projections of all the sports. It's the sport that we first started working on together like 6 years ago when we got into this business. So it's got a special place in our hearts. I'm just really excited for the NBA season. So definitely check that out. It comes with premium podcast article each day that we've got a 5-game slate or higher. And we always have lineup alerts, which is going to be huge on DraftKings with the return of late swap.
All right. Jamison Crowder will be a game time decision, by the way. So if he's out, I don't mind Harris. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I'll have to mess around with our projections, do some if-thens on the Crowder situation.
All right, I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me at ThePME on Twitter. Hit the description and find all the links to all the articles, all the shows from the course of the week. And remember, always smash the like button. Help keep all this stuff free. Thank you for watching. Good luck in Week 6. I'll see you next time.
Mayo experience! Experience!